5 years after the Great Evacuation, New Velaris had become a living wonder of the galaxy, crystal gardens blooming in alien soil, cities of light rising from plains that had never known Valori feet, and 800 million beings building a new civilization under a young and healthy Star Elder crystallographer Desik stood in the central plaza of the capital city, her ancient form catching the morning light and scattering it across the gathered crowd. And she prepared to give the testimony that galactic historians had traveled from 100 worlds to hear. "I was there at the beginning," she said. Her voice amplified across the plaza and broadcast to billions of viewers across known space. 300 years ago, when I was young and the universe seemed full of possibilities, I helped rescue 40,000 humans from a dying ship in the void. The crowd fell silent, Valori and human alike, all listening to the words of the last living witness to both ends of the great cycle of kindness. "We did not save them for profit or politics," Desik continued. "We saved them because they were dying and we could help." And that seemed like reason enough. She paused to let the words settle. "We never expected repayment, and we never asked for recognition. And when the cost of our mercy became clear, when our trade consortium collapsed and our species fell from galactic significance, we did not regret our choice." Her crystal eyes swept across the crowd, because some things matter more than economics, and some debts cannot be measured in currency. And we believed that kindness given freely was its own reward. She turned to face the human delegation, where Ambassador Yun Sioha sat with tears streaming down her face. "We were wrong." Desik's sigh and murmur rippled through the crowd. "We were wrong. Because the reward of kindness is not just the warmth it brings to your own heart. The reward is what happens when that kindness is remembered. When it takes root in the souls of those you helped. When it grows and multiplies across generations until it becomes something larger than any single act of mercy." She raised one trembling limb toward the human delegation. "We gave them 40,000 lives. And they gave us 800 million. We gave them rescue. And they gave us a home. We gave them kindness. And they gave us hope for the entire galaxy." The applause began slowly and built until it shook the plaza. Humans and Valori cheering together, their voices mingling in celebration of something that transcended species and politics and all the petty calculations that usually govern relations between worlds. Later that evening, Sioha found Desik alone in the memorial garden, where crystals from the old world had been planted among flowers from Earth in a living symbol of the bond between their species. "That was a beautiful speech," Sioha said. Desik made the wind chime sound of Valori laughter. "I have had many years to think about what I wanted to say." They walked together through the garden, past crystal formations that glowed with inner light, past roses and lily and flowers from a dozen human worlds, past the statue of the Esperanza that stood at the garden's heart. "The galaxy is changing," Sioha said, "because of what we did here," and it was true in the 5 years since the evacuation. Something had shifted in the way species treated each other across known space. The Rithani had organized relief efforts for 3 different disaster-struck worlds. Asking nothing in return, the Morvax had opened their borders to refugees from a civil war in a neighboring sector. Even the Keth Dominion, humbled by their failure at Valori Prime, had quietly begun contributing to humanitarian efforts, and when a natural disaster struck their agricultural worlds, they had swallowed their pride and asked for help. Humanity had sent ships within hours. No questions asked, no conditions attached. "You taught us something important," Sioha continued, "when you saved our ancestors all those years ago, and now we are teaching it to others, and they are teaching it to still more." Desik nodded slowly. "The mathematics of kindness," she said. "What do you mean?" The ancient Valori turned to face her. "When we saved the Esperanza, we bankrupted ourselves for 40,000 humans. And the calculation seemed foolish by any rational measure. But those 40,000 became billions. And those billions remembered, and when we needed saving in return, they came with 12,000 ships and the support of 17 species. She gestured at the garden around them. Kindness multiplies. Ambassador, it grows and spreads and compounds across time until the original investment becomes something vast beyond calculation. Sioha thought about that for a long moment. And if we keep teaching that lesson? She asked as Thesik's crystal form caught the starlight. Then perhaps one day the galaxy will be a place where no species faces extinction alone, where no people drift abandoned in the dark, where kindness is the foundation of civilization rather than the exception. She reached out and touched Sioha's shoulder. That is the future your people are building. Ambassador, not an empire of conquest, but a community of memory, where every act of generosity creates a debt that will be repaid in ways no one can predict. A young Valori child ran past them, chasing a human child through the garden, their laughter mingling in the evening air. And both Thesik and Sioha watched them with tears in their eyes. They will never know a universe where they were enemies. Sioha said, "No," Thesik agreed. "They will only know friendship, and that is the greatest gift we can give them." The next morning, Sioha stood before the Galactic Council as the representative of humanity and the Valori together, proposing something that had never been attempted in the history of known space. "We call it the Universal Compact of Remembered Kindness," she said. "And it is not a treaty or an alliance, but a promise that signatory species will remember generosity, will return kindness when called upon, and will teach their children that mercy is strength rather than weakness." The council chamber was silent. "We are not asking for military commitments or economic obligations," Sioha continued. "We are asking for something simpler and more profound. We are asking you to believe that the way we treat each other matters, that kindness can be a foundation for civilization, that the galaxy can be better than it has been." She paused. "The Valori taught us this lesson 2 centuries ago, and we have spent the years since learning what it means. Now we offer that lesson to everyone." The vote was not unanimous. It never is in the Galactic Council, but it was overwhelming. 112 species signed the compact on its first day, and more added their names in the weeks that followed, until the idea of remembered kindness had spread to every corner of known space and across 10,000 worlds. Species who had forgotten how to hope began to remember how to helping the garden on New Velaris. Thesik watched the news feeds with tears in her ancient eyes, surrounded by human and Valori children who wanted to hear the story of how it all began. "Once upon a time," she told them, "a small species found a ship of strangers dying in the dark, and they chose to help even though it cost them everything. The children listened with wide eyes, and the strangers remembered. And they told their children, and their children told their children. And when the time came to repay the kindness, they came with more ships than the stars in the sky." A human child raised her hand. "And what happened then?" she asked. Thesik smiled, her crystal form glowing with inner light. "Then the whole galaxy began to remember what it meant to be kind, and the universe became a little less dark and a little less cold, and a little more like home." She looked up at the stars that shone above the garden. "And it all began because someone chose to help strangers without asking anything in return." The children sat in wonder, human and Valori together, and Thesik knew that they would carry this story with them for the rest of their lives, and tell it to their own children someday, because humanity never forgot kindness. And now the whole galaxy was learning to remember, and that was the greatest gift of all. The evacuation of Valori Prime became the most watched event in galactic history. Broadcast across every communication network to billions of viewers who had never before cared about the fate of a small crystalline species on a dying world human. Ships descended through the atmosphere in careful formations, their cargo holds open and ready. their crews working alongside Valori guides, who showed them where to step carefully and what to handle with gentle hands. Ambassador Yun Sioa walked through the ancient crystal gardens of the Valori capital, her boots crunching softly on paths that had been tended for 10,000 years, and she felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. These gardens would be transplanted to new soil on a new world, and human xenobiologists were working around the clock to ensure that every crystalline plant would survive the journey, that every delicate formation would be preserved for future generations. "We have never moved to gardens before," said the Valori curator who walked beside her, his voice thin with age and worry. "They have grown here since before our species could travel the stars." Sioha nodded. "Our teams have studied Valori botany for 50 years. Preparing for this moment, we will not let your gardens die." The curator stopped and turned to face her with eyes that had seen 3 centuries. 50 years? He asked. "You have been planning this for 50 years? Sioha hesitated, then decided that honesty was owed. "We have been monitoring your son since we developed the technology to do so," she admitted. "And we knew this day would come eventually. So we began preparations, identifying suitable worlds, developing transplantation techniques, building the infrastructure that would be needed." The curator's crystal form trembled. "You never said anything. We did not want to frighten your people with predictions of doom. And we hoped the star would last longer than our model suggested." She reached out and touched his limb gently. "But we never forgot what we owed you. And we were always ready to answer when the time came." The curator made a sound like wind chimes in rain, and Sioha recognized it as Valori weeping. "How do we repay such kindness?" he asked, and Sioha smiled. "You already have 200 years ago, when you saved my ancestors without thought of reward." The evacuation continued for months, and the galaxy watched as human ships carried millions of Valori to temporary stations and transit hubs, as cultural preservation teams documented everything that could not be physically moved, as engineers designed special transport containers for crystal gardens, and historians archived 10,000 years of Valori memory. And everywhere they went, the humans showed the same care and attention, the same patient kindness that asked nothing in return. On the medical frigate Compassion, Dr. Park Minji examined a young Valori who had been injured during the loading process, her scanner humming as she assessed the damage to his crystalline limbs. "You will heal," she told him, "but you need to rest and let your crystal matrix reform naturally." The young Valori looked up at her with eyes that swirled with confusion. "Why do you help us?" he asked. "We cannot pay you, and we have nothing to offer your species." Minji set down her scanner and sat beside him. "Do you know the story of the Esperanza?" she asked. The young one nodded. "Every Valori child learned that story." "My family was not on that ship," Minji said. "And I have no personal debt to your people, but I am human. And we share our debts as we share our memories." She smiled at him. "When your ancestors saved those humans 200 years ago, they did not ask if the survivors would be useful or profitable. They simply helped because help was needed. And we do the same." The young Valori reached out with an uninjured limb and touched her hand. "Thank you," he said. "You are welcome," she replied. "Now rest, and when you wake, we will be one day closer to your new home." Word of the evacuation spread beyond the Valori system, beyond human space, to the farthest corners of the galaxy, where species had never met a human being in person, and something began to change. The Rithani Collective, watching the evacuation unfold, proposed a formal kindness pact with humanity, not a military alliance, but a promise to help each other in times of need, to remember generosity and return it when called upon. The Morvax Federation followed suit, then the Thesan Republic, then a dozen smaller species who had experienced human compassion in one form or another. The Galactic Council found itself facing something unprecedented, a new kind of power structure, built not on weapons or wealth, but on accumulated gratitude. On centuries of small kindnesses that were finally bearing fruit, they have built an empire without conquest, marveled the Rithani ambassador. And we never saw it happening on a quiet evening during the final weeks of evacuation. Ambassador Yun Sioha sat with elder crystallographer Thesik in the observation lounge of a transport ship. Watching the stars drift past the window, Thesik had not left Valori Prime in 2 centuries. Not since the day she had helped rescue the Esperanza survivors. And the sight of the universe from space still filled her with wonder. "I have a question," she said, "that I have been afraid to ask." Sioha nodded for her to continue. "Why do you do this?" Thesik asked, truly not the official answer about debts and memory, but the real reason that humans sacrifice so much for species they barely know. Sioha was silent for a long moment. When we were stranded in the void, she finally said, "When the Esperanza was dying and no one would answer our calls, we felt more alone than any species has ever felt alone in the dark. Abandoned by a galaxy that did not care if we lived or died." She turned to face Thesik, "And then you came. Strangers from a world we had never visited, speaking a language we could barely understand. And you saved us simply because we needed saving." Her voice grew soft. "That moment changed us as a species. It taught us that kindness was possible even between strangers. That the universe was not as cold as it seemed. That we did not have to be alone." She reached out and touched Thesik's limb. "We do this because you showed us who we wanted to be. And we have been trying to live up to that example ever since." Thesik's crystal form caught the starlight and scattered it into rainbows. "We never meant to teach you anything," she said. "We were simply doing what seemed right." Sioha smiled. "That is the most powerful teaching of all." The last Valori left their dying world 3 months later, carried on human ships to a new planet that had been prepared for them in secret, a garden world called New Velaris, where the soil had been prepared and the climate adjusted and everything made ready for crystalline beings to build a new home. And as the fleet departed, carrying 800 million refugees to safety, the galaxy looked upon humanity with new eyes and began to understand what kind of species had been growing among them all along. Not conquerors, but caretakers, not rulers, but friends, and every species that witnessed the evacuation began to wonder what they might accomplish if they followed the human example and chose kindness over calculation. The ripples were spreading, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Keth War fleet emerged from transit like a swarm of iron locusts, 400 warships bristling with weapons that could crack planets and burn cities. And Commander Varax stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the human fleet on his tactical display. 12,000 ships hung in orbit around Valori Prime, and not a single one of them carried weapons. Varax had commanded fleets in 3 wars, had ordered bombardments that turned continents to glass, and had never once felt uncertain about his purpose. Something about this situation made his mandibles click with unease. "Open a channel to the human." "Commander," he ordered. The communication officer complied. And moments later, the face of a human male appeared on the main screen holder, with gray streaking his dark hair and calm eyes that showed no trace of fear. "This is Fleet Admiral Kang Do-yoon of the United Human Colonies," the man said. "I assume you are here about our evacuation operation." Varax straightened his armored body. "I am Commander Varax of the Keth Dominion, and I am here to inform you that your presence in this system violates Keth territorial claims. You have 30 standard hours to withdraw your vessels or face military consequences." The human admiral did not flinch. "I appreciate the courtesy of advance notice, Commander, but I must respectfully decline your demand." Varax's mandibles clicked sharply. "You have no warships." "Admiral, I have 400, and I am authorized to use them. I am aware of the tactical situation." "Then you understand that resistance is futile," the human smiled. And it was not the desperate smile of a cornered prey animal. It was something else entirely. Something that made Varax's warrior instincts prickle with warning. "Commander, may I show you something?" Before Varax could respond, his tactical officer let out a sharp hiss of alarm. "Commander, we are detecting new vessels emerging from transit multiple signatures. Unknown configuration." Varax whipped around to face the display ships were appearing all around the system. Not human vessels, but craft of different designs. Rathani cruisers with their distinctive curved hulls. Morvax frigates with their heavy armor plating. Decent medical ships with their white and blue markings. And dozens of other configurations from species Varax barely recognized. "What is this?" he demanded. Admiral Kang's voice came through the channel, calm and steady. "These are our friends. Commander species that humanity has helped over the past 2 centuries. And they have come to return the favor." The tactical display updated with new contacts. 17 species had sent vessels to the Valori system. And more were arriving every minute. Varax felt his certainty crumbling. "This changes nothing," he said. But his voice lacked conviction. "The Keth Dominion does not fear. I am not trying to frighten you." "Commander," the human admiral leaned forward. "I am trying to help you understand something important about the situation you have entered," he gestured. And the display changed to show the human fleet in detailed cargo ships and passenger liners. Mining vessels and private shuttles, craft of every size and description. None of them armed. There are families on those ships. Commander parents and children who volunteered to help with the evacuation. Teachers and doctors and farmers who left their homes to carry strangers to safety. Varax stared at the display. "If you attack this fleet, you will not be attacking a military force. You will be attacking civilians. And the galaxy is watching." The weight of those words settled over Varax like a shroud on Valori Prime. Thesic gathered the young ones in the central shelter and tried to explain what was happening in the sky above them. "The Keth have come with warships," she said, keeping her voice calm for their sake. "But the humans have not fled. And neither will we." A young Valori with barely formed crystal limbs looked up at her with frightened eyes. "Will the humans fight the Keth?" Thesic considered the question. "They have no weapons to fight with. Then why do they stay?" It was the question she had been asking herself. And she finally understood the answer. "Because they remember," she said softly. 200 years ago, we helped them when they had nothing to offer us. And we did not turn back when the cost became clear. And now they are doing the same." She gathered the young one close. "The humans stay because that is who they are. They do not abandon those who showed them kindness. Even when the cost is high. Even when the danger is great." The young one's crystal form trembled against her. "But what if the Keth attack anyway?" Thesic looked toward the observation window, where she could see human workers still moving equipment, still preparing shelters, still doing their jobs as if 400 warships were not hanging overhead ready to rain down fire. "Then the galaxy will see what happens to those who threaten human friends," she said. "And the Keth will learn a lesson they will never forget, in the silence of space." Varax studied the tactical display and made his calculations. 17 species had answered humanity's call, and more were sending messages of support through diplomatic channels. The Galactic Council itself had issued a statement urging peaceful resolution, which was as close to taking sides as that useless body ever came. If he attacked, he would win the battle for 100 warships against a ragtag collection of civilian vessels and light escorts. Would be no contest, but he would lose everything else. The galaxy would see the Keth as monsters who murdered children and burned refugees. And every species that had ever considered friendship with humanity would become an enemy of the Dominion overnight. Varax had not risen to command a war fleet by being stupid. Open a channel to the Dominion Council. He ordered his communication officer complied, and soon the face of the Commander General appeared on screen. Report. Commander Varax. Varax chose his words carefully. The situation has developed beyond initial projections. 17 species have deployed vessels to support the human operation, and an attack on the evacuation fleet would result in unacceptable diplomatic consequences. The Commander General's mandibles clicked with displeasure. You are recommending withdrawal? I am recommending strategic patience. The humans will complete their evacuation and leave, and we will maintain our territorial claims without providing our enemies with a propaganda victory. The silence stretched long before the Commander General responded. Very well. Commander, hold position, but do not engage. And we will revisit this matter through diplomatic channels. The connection closed, and Varax turned back to the main display where Admiral Kang's face still waited. You knew, Varax said. You knew we would not attack. The human admiral shook his head. I hoped you would not attack. Commander, there is a difference. And if I had? Kang's eyes met his through the screen. Then I would have died with my people, protecting our friends. And humanity would have made the Keth pay for every life taken. The words were not a threat. They were a simple statement of fact. Delivered without anger or bluster, Varax clicked his mandibles slowly. You are either the bravest species in the galaxy, Admiral, or the most foolish. The human smiled. We have been accused of both. Commander, history will decide which is correct. The Keth fleet held its position as the evacuation continued, and the galaxy watched and remembered, and drew its own conclusions about the kind of species that would stand, unarmed against warships to protect those who had once shown them kindness and in the shelters below. Desik held the young ones close and told them stories of mercy given and mercy returned, of deaths remembered across centuries, of the strange and wonderful humans who never forgot kindness. The crisis had passed, and the work continued, and humanity had shown the universe something it would never forget. The Luna shipyards had not seen activity like this since the last Great War, and Fleet Admiral Kang Do-yoon stood at the central command station watching streams of data pour across his screens as ships from every corner of human space reported for duty. 12,000 vessels so far and more, arriving every hour. Cargo haulers stripped of their freight, luxury liners with their ballrooms converted to dormitories, mining ships with their drills removed to make room for passengers, and even a few ancient generation ships pulled from museums and hastily refitted for one last voyage. Enoyan had commanded battle fleets and overseen military operations across 3 sectors. But nothing in his career had prepared him for this, the largest civilian mobilization in the history of any species, organized in less than a month. Powered by nothing more than memory and gratitude, his aide approached with another tablet full of numbers. Admiral, the Prosperity Coalition has just pledged 300 additional transport vessels, and the Mars Collective is sending their entire medical fleet. Do-yoon nodded without looking up from his screens. And the volunteers? Still coming in faster than we can process them. Sir, we have engineers, xenobiologists, cultural preservation specialists, and about 50,000 civilians who just want to help carry things. A smile tugged at the corner of Do-yoon's mouth. Turn no one away, he said. We will find work for everyone, because this was not a military operation where efficiency mattered more than sentiment. This was humanity showing the galaxy who they truly were, and every pair of hands that wanted to help would be welcomed across the void. In orbit around the dying world of Velori Prime, Elder Crystallographer Desik stood at the observation port of her research station and watched the human ships arrive. She had lived for 300 years, long enough to remember the day her people had set out to rescue the Esperanza. Long enough to remember the faces of the humans they had pulled from that crippled vessel. And she had never imagined she would see anything like this. Ships filled the sky. They came in waves, emerging from faster-than-light transit like flowers blooming in darkness. Each one announcing its arrival with a pulse of light before taking its assigned position in the growing fleet. And they kept coming until Desic could no longer count them. "How many?" asked her young assistant, his crystal form barely clouded, his voice trembling with something between fear and hope. "Thousands," Desic replied, and even her ancient voice shook with emotion. "Thousands of ships. And they are still coming." She pressed one limb against the cold glass of the observation port. "I remember them," she said softly. "The humans from the Esperanza. I was a young navigator on one of the rescue vessels, and I helped carry their children to safety. And they wept and thanked us in broken trade speak that we could barely understand." The young assistant moved closer. "You never told me you were there." "I do not speak of it often," Desic admitted. "It was simply what needed to be done, and I never expected anything in return." She watched another wave of human ships emerge from transit, but they remembered. "And they are here. And look at them, look at what they have brought for us." Below them, on the surface of Valori Prime, teams of human engineers were already setting up temporary structures and planning evacuation routes. Working alongside Valori, guides who showed them the crystal gardens that needed special handling, and the ancient libraries that contained the history of an entire species, and in the halls of galactic power, other species watched with expressions ranging from disbelief to calculation. The Rathani Collective, whose plague had been cured by human medical teams 50 years ago, quietly began repositioning their defensive fleet, the Morvax Federation, whose colony had been rebuilt with human aid after a meteor strike, made subtle inquiries about how they could assist the evacuation and the Keth Dominion, seeing opportunity where others saw sentiment, made their own calculations. Commander Varax received his orders in the war room of the Dominion flagship, his armored carapace gleaming under harsh lights as he studied the tactical display. "The Valori system lies within our sphere of influence," his superior explained, "and we cannot allow humanity to establish a presence there without challenge." Varax clicked his mandibles. "The humans have brought no warships, Commander General. Their fleet is entirely civilian vessels, which makes this the perfect opportunity to remind the galaxy of Keth military supremacy without risking actual combat." The orders were clear. Proceed to Valori space with a war fleet and demand human withdrawal under threat of Force 400 warships against 12,000 unarmed civilian vessels. Vorax did not like the mathematics of it, not because he feared defeat, but because there was no honor in threatening the helpless. And some part of him suspected that humanity knew exactly how this would look to the watching galaxy, but orders were orders. The Keth war fleet departed the next morning, and news of their mission spread across every communication network in known space on Valori Prime. Desic received the alert in her research station and felt her crystal heart go cold. "The Keth are coming," her assistant reported, his voice cracking with fear. 400 warships. "And they say they will fire on human vessels if they do not withdraw." Desic turned from the observation port to face him. "And the humans?" she asked. "What do the humans say?" The assistant checked his data tablet with trembling limbs. "They say they are not leaving." Desic closed her visual organs and remembered a day 2 centuries past, when her ship had raced through the void to reach a dying vessel full of strangers. And she had never once considered turning back, even when the cost became clear. She opened her eyes and looked at the sky full of human ships. "No," she said quietly. "I do not suppose they would. The Keth would arrive in 30 days. And the humans kept working as if the threat did not exist. Landing more ships, organizing more evacuation routes, building more temporary shelters for refugees who would soon have no world to call home. And when frightened, Valori asked the human workers if they were not afraid of the coming war fleet. The humans simply smiled and kept working. "We did not come this far to leave you now," they said, over and over, to every crystalline being who asked, because humanity never forgot kindness. And they were not about to let fear make them. Forget it now. Fesic watched the preparations continue beneath the light of her dying sun and understood at last why her ancestors had risked everything for those strangers in the dark 200 years ago. Some species were simply worth saving, and the humans had proven that truth by returning to save the Valori in turn, whatever came next, whatever the Keth brought with their warships and their threats. Fesic knew one thing with absolute certainty: the humans would not abandon them, and that knowledge was worth more than all the stars in the sky. The Galactic Council chamber stretched wide like the belly of some ancient beast. Its curved walls lined with seats for representatives of 900 species. And today, every seat was full because the Valori had come to beg for their lives. Ambassador Sioha sat in the human delegation box and watched the crystalline beings shuffle toward the speaking platform, their 6 limbs clicking softly against the polished floor, their translucent bodies catching the light and throwing rainbows across the chamber walls. And she felt her heart twist with something between sorrow and rage. The Valori speaker was old, his crystal form clouded with age, his voice thin as wind through broken glass. When he addressed the council, "Our star dies faster than your scientists predicted," he said. And Sioha noticed how his limbs trembled with the effort of standing. "We have 30 years now, not 300. And we come before you to ask for help in relocating our people." The chamber erupted in murmurs, and Sioha watched the reactions ripple through the delegations like waves across still water. And she saw what she expected to see: calculation, indifference, and the cold mathematics of politics. The Valori numbered 800 million souls, and they possessed no military fleet, no valuable resources, no strategic territory, and no leverage whatsoever in the games that species played with each other across the stars. The council president, a massive insectoid creature from the Keth Dominion, raised one armored limb for silence. "The council acknowledges the Valori petition," he said, his voice buzzing through translation devices. "We will form a committee to study the feasibility of relocation efforts and report back within 5 standard years. 5 years of study for a species with 30 years to live." And Sioha felt her hands curl into fists beneath the table. The Valori speaker bowed his crystalline head, accepting what he knew was a death sentence wrapped in bureaucratic language. And Sioha could not bear to watch him shuffle back toward his delegation. Like a condemned man walking to his execution, she stood, and the motion drew every eye in the chamber. "The human delegation invokes the right of species debt recognition," she said, her voice steady and clear, carrying across the vast space without amplification. Because she had trained for moments exactly like this one. The council president's compound eyes glittered with annoyance. "On what grounds does humanity claim debt to the Valori?" he demanded. Sioha smiled, and it was not a kind smile. 207 years ago, she began, the human colony ship Esperanza suffered catastrophic engine failure in deep space, stranding 40,000 human beings, men, women, and children with failing life support and no hope of rescue. She paused to let the silence build. Every species within range received our distress call, and every species calculated the cost of rescue against the benefit. And every species decided that 40,000 humans were not worth the fuel, the time, or the risk. The chamber had gone utterly still. Every species except one. She turned to look at the Valori delegation, at the old speaker who had frozen in place halfway to his seat, his clouded crystal form suddenly bright with recognition. The Valori diverted their entire merchant fleet, every ship they possessed, to reach the Esperanza before life support failed. And they succeeded, and they saved every single human aboard that vessel. The Valori speaker made a sound like wind chimes in a storm, And Sioha saw moisture gathering at the edges of his visual organs. The rescue effort bankrupted the Valori Trade Consortium. She continued, and they never recovered their economic standing in galactic commerce. And they never asked for repayment, and they never demanded recognition. Because they did not save those humans for profit or politics. They saved them because it was right. She turned back to face the council. Every human child learns of the Valori mercy in school. And we have not forgotten. And we will never forget. The council president shifted his massive bulk. Historical sentiment is touching, Ambassador. But it does not change the logistical impossibility of relocating 800 million. I am not finished, Sioha said. And her voice cracked like thunder. The president fell silent. Humanity will relocate the Valori species, Sioha announced. Every man, woman, child, and elder among them, along with their cultural artifacts, their crystal gardens, their historical records, and anything else they wish to bring. Laughter erupted from several delegations. The mocking kind that species directed at those they considered naive or foolish. And the Keth president's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. 800 million beings. The president said, "You propose to move 800 million beings with what fleet? What resources? What territory will receive them?" Sioha let the laughter die before she answered. "You misunderstand," she said calmly. "I am not asking permission, and I am not requesting council resources, and I am not negotiating terms." She picked up her data tablet and transmitted a file to every delegation in the chamber. This is a courtesy notification that human vessels will be entering Valori space within the next 30 standard days to begin evacuation procedures. And this notification is provided as a matter of diplomatic protocol, not as a request for approval. The chamber exploded into chaos, delegations shouting over each other, the president hammering his speaking limb against the podium, and through it all, Sioha stood perfectly still with her hands clasped behind her back. The Valori speaker had not moved from his spot in the aisle. And when Sioha looked at him, she saw that he was weeping. Crystalline tears sliding down his translucent face and catching the light like scattered diamonds. She walked toward him, ignoring the uproar around her, and stopped close enough that he could hear her without raising her voice. "My great-great-grandmother was on the Esperanza," she said softly. "She was 7 years old when your people came for her, and she named her first daughter Valori in your honor. And that name has passed through my family for 200 years. The old Valori reached out with one trembling limb and touched her shoulder. "We never expected," he began. "That is exactly why we remember." Sioha said, "You helped us when we had nothing to offer in return. And you did it anyway. And humanity does not forget kindness." She squeezed his limb gently. "We are coming for you, all of you. And we will not leave a single one of your people behind." The Valori speaker made that wind chime sound again. And this time, Sioha recognized it as laughter mixed with tears behind them. The council continued its uproar. Species shouting about jurisdiction and protocols, and the impossibility of what humanity proposed. And none of it mattered because Sioha had not come to ask permission. She had come to settle a debt 2 centuries old. And nothing in the galaxy was going to stop her. The transmission went out that night to every human world. The Valori need us. And we are going within hours. The first ships began to launch. Freighters emptied their cargo holds. Passenger liners canceled their routes. Mining vessels abandoned profitable asteroids. And private citizens with nothing more than personal shuttles volunteered to carry whatever they could across the stars. Teachers, and farmers and engineers and artists. Parents who remembered the stories their grandparents had told them. Children who had learned of Valori mercy in their first year of school. All of them answered the call because humanity never forgot kindness. And when the time came to repay it, they did not hesitate in watching from the observation deck of the Valori embassy. The old crystalline speaker looked up at the sky, filling with human ships, and wept again. Not with sorrow, but with wonder, because 200 years ago, his people had given mercy to strangers in the dark. And now those strangers had returned to carry them home.